I just watched Ford v Ferrari. I was really happy with the movie. I thought it was really good overall. From what I've read, it seems like the events that it was based on, it largely follows, although of course some things were added in for drama. I wish we had more movies like this one. A really simple story, interesting characters, very clear motivations and goals, and they all bump heads a lot because of personality differences. It doesn't get crazy complicated. You get very good performances because you have a pretty talent-laden cast. Just a simple, really well-executed movie. And just because it's based on actual events doesn't mean fictional movies couldn't do this as well. They just tend not to. I think it also has a lot of really interesting portrayals of masculinity and kind of dynamics between men, including father and son. And I think it shows kind of the double-edged sword of a lot of more stereotypically male traits. And just generally speaking, personally, I think most traits are a double-edged sword. I don't know if there's any traits that I would say are just wholly beneficial. But I'll leave the talk about the masculine stuff to the end. Something else the movie does really well is show kind of the politics of just day-to-day life and the reality of how they can impact you. And obviously when I say politics, I'm referring to getting along with your bosses, kissing the right asses, having the right connections, not thoughts on abortion or gun control. The summary of the movie is that Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, is a former driver who was forced to retire due to heart issues. So now he's essentially a coach for driving teams. Ken Miles, played by Christian Bale, is kind of an eccentric mechanic, but super high risk taking, very short tempered, but very, very good at driving and good at his job. And these two are your primary protagonists for the Ford side of the movie. The other characters you have are Leo Beebe, played by Josh Lucas, who's always a good douchebag, and Lee Ioccaca, played by John Bernthal. And it's great to see him not just being the Punisher in a different outfit. So Henry Ford II obviously is in charge of the Ford Motor Company. We're in the early 60s, and they want to find a way to boost sales. Ferrari has dominated the 24-hour Le Mans race and won it 5 years in a row. Ford wants to buy Ferrari, but when Ferrari finds out that they would lose the racing team, they say no, and they shit all over Henry Ford II. So when Ioccaca relays this message back to Henry Ford, he gets pissed off and says, why don't we try to win the Le Mans? At this point, Ioccaca hires Carroll Shelby, who previously won the Le Mans, and Shelby gets Ken Miles to be his driver and engineer. And this story is about how they developed the Ford GT40 at the early stages of it. Meanwhile, Miles can't get along with anyone. When the movie starts out, he's throwing a wrench at Shelby, who's his coach or manager. He shits all over the Ford to Beebe at a big display. And Beebe ends up keeping Miles from being a driver because he's pissed off about this. So all the Fords get blown out, as Miles predicted they would. Shelby tells Ford, we can't run this thing by committee. You need to just let me run it how I want to run it. So then he brings Miles back in. They develop the car that they need to. And during this development, there's an accident with the brakes where the car wrecks and explodes. So obviously you see the danger of it right away. They come up with a solution to trade out the entire rotor system during the race, which they say is allowed because it's a part of the car and not the whole car. So Beebe is really pushing against Miles as a PR liability, because at the end of the day, they are a corporation and they want to win the race, but they can't have him saying negative things about the car and kind of killing the marketing. Shelby makes a bet with Ford and says that his team with Miles as the driver will win the Daytona, and if they do, he gets to drive at Le Mans, and if they don't, Ford can just buy Shelby American outright. Obviously, they win. We see him push it past 7,000 RPMs. He's a very high-risk driver and is willing to risk the car falling apart on him. And then this leads into the Le Mans race. Obviously, it goes on and on. The Ferraris all don't finish. And even though Miles is way out ahead, they ask him to slow down in order for the three Fords to finish simultaneously for the photo op and the marketing. At this point, Miles sets a track record for the fastest lap, but then he eventually does slow down. They all finish at the same time, but he gets second place instead of first because the other guy started a bit further back. Now, this part is exaggerated for the movie. Apparently, in real life, he finished very clearly in second, but Ford did take the top 3 spots, breaking Ferrari's 5-year streak. A few months later, testing their new models, Miles dies. And this is a pretty abrupt ending, and it was kind of my biggest issue with the movie. But then I looked it up, and that is what happened. I'm not really sure how you get around that when you're basing off a true story. I think my personal preference probably would have been maybe just to let him ride off into the sunset and then do just kind of text at the end. Because they do text anyway, saying that Ford did win the next 3 in 67, 68, and 69. So they did have those streaks, and it says it was the last time that, Ford won the Le Mans like that. I think it would have been fine to include his death in the text and not actually show it on screen. They just show it in the distance and his kids there. And yeah, it happened. But as far as the movie itself, it was a bit of a dour tone to end on, considering the rest of the movie was generally upbeat and overall, I would say pretty positive feeling. That's a quick summary of the movie. I want to talk about the stuff that I liked throughout it. So one of the things I really liked about it was that Ken Miles has a pretty good relationship with his son. His son's sneaking a radio into his room at night to listen to his races. He's very into it. He goes and sits on the track with his dad. Sometimes his dad lets him ride around with him. Obviously the kid's horrified when he sees his dad run out of the car on fire. But there's some nice little moments in there where Miles is trying to articulate kind of his general strategy and how he knows where he's going to turn and how he feels while he's driving and the kind of freedom that comes with it. And they function as really good father-son moments as well as good moments for the audience to kind of explain why he's such a good driver and connect you to that side of the story. I also really like the relationship between Ken Miles and Molly Miles, his wife, because they're kind of struggling for money. He's still trying to race and still doing his thing, but he's just not making enough. And he's kind of got a shop, but you can tell he sort of treats it as a hobby and he's experimental and he's just a real dick. So he's to the point where he's like, look, I'll give this stuff up and I'll just provide for the family. And then what brings him back in is that Shelby tells him that he'll get paid $200 a day to work for Ford for the Le Mans race. And his wife gets super pissed because he's kind of hiding it from her instead of just telling her outright. But I think it makes his character interesting that he's willing to do what's necessary for his family. But we also see when he's driving, he's kind of a maniac and he is willing to drive the car until it explodes. He is willing to take risk and crash it. And even though it's based on a real guy, it is kind of fitting that it led to his untimely death, which is obviously sad to say. I also think the relationship between Miles and Shelby is really good because they both do want to help each other, but their personalities are so in conflict that they each get frustrated with the other. Shelby's constantly trying to rein Miles in because he's just so hot-headed and just rude to everyone and makes him really hard to get along with. But then after Shelby pulls Miles from the team, when he goes to apologize and recruit him again after he gets power, Miles punches him in the face and they just kind of duke it out in the front yard as Miles' wife watches. And they even reference previous times they had fought as well. And I just really like this portrayal as a relationship between guys because they respect each other and they care for each other and they are trying to do what's best. But sometimes you just need to get it all out of your system, kind of forgive each other and then move on. So seeing two guys that are supposed to be in their mid-40s-ish just duke it out kind of like schoolboys was hilarious. But also I think it's one of those things that guys are just like that sometimes. And obviously a lot of movies would portray this as toxic or unhealthy. And it's certainly dumb, and I think even the guys involved would agree afterward. But that's just how some guys deal with shit. My friends and I used to get drunk and wrestle in college. We used to play intramural sports together where things get a little bit heated. We didn't come to blows like that, but I think that kind of physical outlet is really important for men. And even when it's done stupidly, like it is in this movie, I do think it's just a part of how a lot of guys are wired. And there's a reason that schoolboys fighting is a stereotype that exists. So I enjoyed seeing it portrayed in a way that was kind of funny, but not like relationship ending. And I think part of what makes the relationship so great throughout the movie is that once Shelby has kind of the final say, or he's only answering to Henry Ford II, he has Miles back the whole way. Like he's repeatedly going up against Ford and BB and ignoring what they're saying and saying, hey, he's the driver, it's his thing. And he's taking his friend's side, which I think is the other part of kind of why the relationship is so positively portrayed in a way that I enjoy. And it's just kind of refreshing to see. Another part of this that I thought was interesting in kind of the portrayal of men is a lot of what's done is done out of a sense of pride and ego. Like Ford wants to buy Ferrari, but Ferrari takes a lot of pride in their racing team. So they say no and really shit all over Ford. Ford, because he's offended by this and how disrespectful it is, and almost just being petty, decides, okay, we're going to try to beat them at the thing they're best at and make Ford dominant. And while it's somewhat juvenile, obviously, to act this way, this kind of pride and maybe even arrogance or hubris does lead to the creation of revolutionary vehicles. Ford does go on to win numerous races. Obviously, GTs and Mustangs and all that shit are still popular today. I'm not a huge car guy, so it doesn't do much for me, but it did have a net positive effect on their brand, on their company, and kind of on the culture as a whole for the car world. Even the pride of Miles and his own ego lets him kind of go against what everyone else says, go against the conventional knowledge, and design these cars and take these risks that other people won't take that allow him great success and really accomplishing his goals to the highest level. There is a nice little moment after the race where even though he got second, Ferrari tips his hat to him because he is the best driver, at least in this movie. And Miles is probably the best example of sort of this double-edged sword that I was talking about, because obviously his pride leads him to great success, but it also leads him to be super difficult to work with. It's why they think he's bad for marketing. It's why he gets cut out kind of routinely. So it goes both ways. Even the risk taking, that's what lets him win the Daytona. It's what lets him perform well at Le Mans. And it's also what leads to his death. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of the way that politics are played throughout the movie. You see at the beginning that Ford is running kind of a by committee, everyone has a say in how they run the race team deal. And he is putting a lot of stock in Bibi's opinion, seemingly Ioccaca's, and not as much with Shelby. But then when he wants to fire Shelby, Shelby essentially says, give me the reins, like let me make the decisions and we'll get you results. It's such a really good way of reflecting the inefficiencies of these bureaucratically run large organizations. I wouldn't even limit it to just corporations. Obviously, the federal government's huge, and there's a lot of this. Whenever you have these big nonprofits, you get a lot of this type of thing where everything's done by committee. No one knows what's actually going on the ground. And you end up with a lot of decisions that are made for other reasons besides getting results on the ground. And this is something we see throughout the movie where Bibi's vying for power over Shelby, where he forces Miles out because he's difficult to work with. And the movie does a great job of showing that Miles is incredibly good at everything he does. And it seems intuitive to him, very second nature. But in the real world, being highly skilled isn't as important as being easy to work with and likable and having the right skill set. I'm sure everyone's heard the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that's something that becomes more and more apparent every day that you get older in life. You know, when you're a teenager, you'll see the people that know the right people getting summer jobs, making crazy money for a kid with no experience, or they're next in line to run a company, even though they've done nothing. Or even just having a lot of friends lets you get job opportunities where you wouldn't before. And at the same time, Miles being such a dick cost him over and over throughout the movie. And we see Shelby and Bibi just battling repeatedly. And finally, when you get to the Le Mans, Shelby essentially just tells Bibi to fuck off at that point, which is really nice because I think everyone who's ever worked for someone else has envisioned at some point telling their boss to fuck off. And as much as he's portrayed as the bad guy and kind of Ford is portrayed as a dick as well, at the end of the day, they are a business. If they could get third place in Le Mans and sell a lot more cars, or first place and sell less cars, they're going to choose to sell more cars, even if it means losing the race. Like, they are a company. Their goal is the bottom line. And for them, that's tied to selling vehicles. In a sense, he is doing what's right for the corporation, as much as no one likes that person, but you will meet plenty of them in your career. And I think that's part of why the movie feels so real, is because when it comes time for the promotion, is it going to be the guy who's hard to work with, who's a dick, who wants to change things? Or is it going to be the guy who sucks up to the boss and just is a yes man and does get results that are in line with the company values, which are making money? Ioccaca is interesting because he doesn't really care either way. He's the one who proposed to buy Ferrari, and then this leads to them creating their race team. But for him, as long as they sell more cars, if the racing team does well, great. But it doesn't really impact him either way. So he's kind of in the background, seemingly rooting for Shelby and Miles, but he's just kind of keeping his head down and will reap the benefits either way. And to me, this is also very realistic. Probably the most common type of person you'll see in a workplace is the one who just wants to get through their day, not cause a ruckus, not have any headaches, not get fired, just do enough to go unnoticed or maybe do a good job and go home. Overall, I think the movie does a lot of things really well. Even just having him crash in practice knowing that he could die, raises the stakes in a very effective way without being crazy over the top. Great performances all around. The fact that it's based on real events, I always find intriguing. I'm not sure if I would say it adds value to the story or not. And even though it's not a huge part of it, I did like the kind of Americans versus the Italians aspect to it, but really enjoyed the movie. Obviously, I was very late to the party. If you haven't seen it, like I hadn't, highly recommend it. I'm gonna leave it there for this one. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. Try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.